Sometimes I have to quit out of Zoom for a minute or two, and then it'll save the recording. But in general, it's going to be right after class. And we're not always going to go to 12:15 every class period. We're probably going to do that today because there's a lot of stuff going on. But some days we'll get through the material in an hour. And well, I assume you spent some time watching the video, so I might just let you guys go early. All of that was a very long-winded way of saying after class is my office hours. That's the same Zoom room, so you can even hang out in the Zoom room if you want to, or just go and get a drink or something and come back and use the same Zoom room for lecture. This is Rachel's information. She does have a Google Voice number because I guess she's hipper than I am and understands how to do that. She also has an email. She's pretty quick at responding to either of them, but same thing, she is a student at CU Denver, so she gets pretty busy. So don't expect her to respond within 5 minutes, but she'll probably respond within 24 hours or something like that. She has office hours at a very similar time as me, except for it's Tuesdays and Thursdays. So instead of right after class for me, because maybe some people have some sort of class after this or some sort of obligation, you can hop into her office hours or student drop-in hours, and those are the same thing, the same Zoom room as recitation is as well. Here are general background things, expectations. I suppose one of them is that we don't use a whole lot of calculators. We do kind of do or they're called activities throughout the semester. You're going to use them more in recitation, but for actual lecture, I don't love kind of you guys using them as a crutch. Like I get that calculators help you, but I don't want you to become fully dependent on them. And every time you have to do 2 times 4, you pull out the calculator. So if you need them, that's fine. Honestly, the course is kind of designed, at least lecture-wise, to give you questions. You don't really need a calculator is the good news. But another good resource is Desmos. That's essentially a free graphing calculator. So just Google Desmos and it'll take you to that. That's great. And that is something we'll kind of be using with, we'll call them activities, but activities that use technology. Obviously, you guys probably know the course prerequisites because you're in it. Here are the Zoom rooms. I think Rachel's link looks different, but I am assuming it actually goes to the same Zoom room. So that works for hers. This is mine. And then I'm going to do my best about posting the recordings that I've done for lecture every single night. I might fall behind and post it the next night or whatever. I'll probably post those as YouTube links though, because Canvas doesn't let me upload a lot of videos because it just takes up a lot of their, I don't know, hard drive space or whatever. So I'll probably do some sort of page or module or something with all of those recordings. There are no specific required text as far as hard copy goes. That being said, if you want to get a hard copy of the textbook, some people like to have that. I get that. This is the information. But the reason that we don't really require a hard copy of the textbook is we do require you guys to pay for an online homework platform called MyMathLab. And in that platform, there is also included the textbook. So it is a little bit of an expensive online homework platform, but the bonus is you don't really have to pay for a textbook. So that's kind of the cost of this course as far as textbook wise goes. And so we'll get into MyMathLab shortly. Actually, a lot of you guys have already registered, which is super cool. But take note of this, maybe jot this down in your notebook. We're going to need this course ID later on when we're setting up our MyMathLabs. Fun quotes. General things about how we want you to be able to understand things, represent things, analyze, apply. Kind of repeat of that as well. And here's where we start being general and vague and actually a little bit more helpful. So college algebra is pretty universal. Almost every single college offers it. But with that in mind, there are kind of different things from different colleges. So potentially in your future, you could say, oh, I actually took college algebra, and the university you are transferring to, or maybe I guess an interviewee might be curious. They said, okay, cool, that's ours is a little bit different from others people's. What did you actually learn in that class? Well, this has all of that information. So this is very helpful of, okay, what are we doing in class and what exactly did we learn? We learned about finding the midpoint of a line. We learned how to find the intercepts of quadratics. So this is very cool. It also kind of has the breakdown of, oh, that's all of the stuff we're going to need for exam 1, all this section. And now we're going to move into exam 2. So if you're ever questioning, saying, what did we actually, what's everything I need to learn for exam 2? Well, this breaks it down very nicely. You're going to need to know average rate of change. You're going to need to identify polynomial functions and stuff like that. So this is a lot of text. It's a huge block of text, but it also is a very helpful block of text. Course schedule, it's very subject to change, as in for starters, we didn't have class on Monday, so we weren't able to spend an entire class period on the syllabus and community building. So these will get shuffled around. We'll probably, if we even get to 1.3 today, we certainly won't cover all of that. So that'll start to kind of move into Monday. So I'll adjust the modules accordingly. We're going to be catching up for a while until the first exam, and then we'll probably start to level out and get on a good pace and follow this fairly closely. So this is generally what we're going to do. If you're planning on missing a class period or you're sick or something, and you say, oh, okay, on Monday, well, we did circles. Yeah, there's a decent shot we did some circles, but maybe send me an email or talk to your friends, ask what you actually covered and what you may have missed. The one thing I will say that I won't adjust a lot is exams. There is a chance if for some reason we get really behind, or I don't know, my internet cuts out for a class period, that I might push these back a class, but I will never move them forward. So there won't be a case where you say, okay, I think the syllabus says we have our first exam on the 17th. I'm not going to surprise you and say, oh, actually it's the 10th. Because I mean, for that reason, maybe you had to miss the 10th thinking it wasn't an exam. So these are the things that won't really be changed very often. If they do, they will get pushed back. They won't be moved forward. Breakdown of the exams. Ooh, that reminds me. One interesting thing about this course is we have a uniform final. Might even want to mark that in your calendar right now. So instead of taking the final during regular class time, our final is going to be on that last Saturday of the semester. It's going to be from 9 to 12. So it is a bulkier exam than the other ones. I wouldn't say it's going to take you 3 times as long as the other ones, but we like to kind of give you that extra time that it is just a bulkier exam. So be aware of that, put that in your schedule. Don't be surprised in the last couple of weeks when I say, oh, we have a final in 2 weeks on Saturday, and you made plans on that Saturday. So watch for that. We'll talk about more of the exam stuff when we get closer. Something to be aware is that each exam you are allowed a note card, front and back. So as we're going along, if something super important shows up, maybe write it down on your note card. And then for the final, you can use an entire 8.5 by 11 sheet of notes, or you can actually use all of the note cards that you've prepped up to that point. We talked about the final. There are test corrections, which again, to be hip, we call them exam wrappers. These are going to give you a chance to gain points back. So if you tanked exam number 2, and you got a 40% on it, you can get up to half of your points back. It depends on the quality of how you correct all of your errors and what you wrote to say why you made your errors. But that's kind of a nice little thing built in that everyone has a bad test day. You can make up a lot of those by getting half of those points back. And we'll also talk about that a little bit more when we get to the exam. And certainly once the exam's taken, we'll get into the specifics of what's needed, when stuff is due, where to submit it, all of that. Talked about MyMathLab briefly. We will go about it, or we'll go into it a little bit more extensively shortly. I do accept late MyMathLab assignments. I don't think I do it up to the exam. I think I give you a bonus week, but we'll talk about all of that when we get there. Talked about discussions. Okay, exam breakdown or grade breakdown. So 35% come from the in-class exams and, well, the test corrections, but those are still just part of your exam scores. Final exams, 15%. We have an online assignment this week. For MyMathLab, I don't think so. Someone asked if we have an online assignment this week. Is that for MyMathLab? Because MyMathLab, we have one posted, but it's not due for 2 weeks. I'll let you respond to that. Yeah. So every MyMathLab assignment you have 2 weeks for, so you'll have plenty of time for that. Then we have our discussions and Desmos activities. That's going to be a little bit more ran by Rachel, because she's going to decide what your discussions are, and she's going to go through the Desmos activities with you. And then finally, I think she briefly mentioned in recitation, and I think it's also posted a little bit later in the syllabus, that 20% does come from that recitation class. So that's what I'm talking about, that it's mandatory. It's a big chunk of your grade, so you need to be going to that. If you don't go to recitation, well, goodbye 20%, which is really hard to make up. And I think her breakdown is that you get 1 point for showing up, you get 1 point for participating in any way, whether or not that's answering a question for her, turning on your camera and acknowledging that you understand. And then I forget what the third point is, but I think that's mentioned later in the syllabus. Let's find out. Grading scale, CU Denver uses a plus or minus. So 92 to 100 is an A, 90 to 92-ish is an A minus. I'm pretty strict with these. Like if you get a 91, I'm not going to round that up to an A. That's going to get you an A minus. But if you get like a 91.8, I mean, it becomes have you been showing up to class? Have you been putting in consistent effort? Have you been doing your test corrections? When that happens, I start to kind of shuffle around points a little bit more, and maybe that 91.8 starts to look a little bit more like a 92. So that's something to be aware of as well, that I'm not going to penalize you for not going above and beyond, but if you are in that borderline case and you could maybe get a couple of additional points, I tend to be able to start to find those towards the end of the semester. Canvas grades are the end all be all of your grades. So MyMathLab has a separate grade book. You might as well ignore it. The Canvas grade is going to be what I look at when I submit your final grades. And so that's why I was saying check those frequently. You're not required to, I don't take attendance, but those in-class assignments pretty much give me the attendance. So if you are super sick and you can't come to class, you can shoot me an email and say, I couldn't make it, but I did watch the video. I did do the worksheet on my own. Can I submit it? Yeah, you can probably submit it. Just don't make it a habit. This is something just I'm very much an advocate for. We do have a very good mental health department. And so there's a counseling center. They give you 10 free sessions per year, which is crazy good because sometimes therapy can be in upwards of $300. So take advantage of that. I do know towards the beginning of the semester, there is typically a pretty long wait list. So you might want to, if you're not feeling great, which I mean, who isn't feeling super wonderful right now? What was I saying? Oh yeah, you might want to put your name on the list now so that they can kind of do their intake and stuff for you. But that's a super great resource. Make sure you're taking advantage of that. Plagiarism's not really a thing. I mean, obviously it is for an exam, but for MyMathLab, work with other people, great. In-class assignments, well, I'm giving you group work, great, work with other people. So the only way I might get concerned is if I'm grading your exams and you're matching the your best friend in the class's grades, then we're going to have a conversation and you're probably going to get a 0 on that assignment. Incompletes are a little bit tricky, but they are doable given certain circumstances. So don't bank on it, but if, I don't know, 3 weeks before the end of the semester, let's say you have an A in the course, but God forbid you're hospitalized and you can't do any more math. Well, that's a great example of, I'll give you the incomplete. Once you're feeling better, we can get those assignments updated and we'll update your grade. But it's very hard. It can't just be, oh, I just didn't show up because I didn't want to anymore. We're not going to give you an incomplete. You have to give us good documentation. You have to show that you've been doing stuff the entire course. And then finally, I mentioned that kind of the chain of command is that if you're having problems with me, talk to Gary, that's fine. If you're having, for some reason, problems with Gary, which I would be very surprised, but it could happen, then the next person in line is Stephen Hartkey. He's in charge of the math department. So if you need to file a big grievance, that's the person to contact. But like I said, kind of do that the route of, okay, I'm having an issue, let me talk to Zach first. Oh, I don't like how Zach's responding, or I don't trust him anymore, let me talk to Gary. Oh, I don't trust Gary, let me talk to Stephen Hartkey. I don't imagine you're going to go that route, but that is kind of the suggested route of issues. And then I think, like I said, I think Rachel said there was 3 points for recitation: showing up, participating. I don't know what the third one is. I'll have her send everyone an email about what that actually looks like and what that is. Are there any, I'll stop shares again. Are there any questions before the last thing we're going to talk about is MyMathLab. Great. Nice and easy. Now it's very sunny, so I can't see. Okay, let's do MyMathLab. And so MyMathLab, I mean, in general, I'm bad at memorizing websites, so I'm sure you could bookmark it, but I always just Google MyMathLab and it's the very first thing that shows up. So this is what the homepage looks like. If you haven't registered for MyMathLab already, we'll quickly go through what that process looks like. Like I said, a lot of you guys have registered, which is great. But if you haven't, you click register as a student. It's going to kind of remind you that the browser isn't ideal, which honestly, it says that about every browser. So I just say ignore and move on. It's going to tell you need 3 things. You need an email address. It doesn't have to be your CU Denver class. We'll talk about week 1 assignment 2, but that reminds me, I need to talk about week 1 assignment 1. Let's actually do that before I forget. So the very first assignment for this class, I believe I posted it on the welcome page, is an introduction assignment. Nope, it's in week 1. So this will be week 1 assignment 1. It's the introduction assignment. If we get to 1.3, which actually seems like a possibility at this point, this would be week 1 assignment 2. But week 1 assignment 1, very simple assignment. It says, ask you what's your name, ask you what's your favorite movie. Takes 10 seconds to answer. The important thing though is I want your submission to be a PDF. So for Word, the way you can do a PDF is you can just do file print and then print it as a PDF. That's great. If you're working out an assignment by hand, I think Rachel mentioned you can use Cam Scanner. That makes things a PDF, but I want everything as a PDF throughout this course. So if you're submitting a file or an exam, do it as a PDF. It makes my life so difficult if you submit it as 20 different JPEGs or something like that. So that's the goal of the first assignment is, yeah, it's kind of silly. What's your name and what's your favorite movie? I actually kind of really like that question. But really it's can you submit it as a PDF and can you submit multiple pages as a PDF? And then to submit it, as I mentioned, you go to assignments, you click week 1, assignment 1. and then you can go ahead and submit an assignment here. I can't because I don't really submit things, but this is where you would submit that assignment, again, as a PDF. And even if you submit something besides a PDF, I'm going to be a stickler this week and say, I'm not giving you points for that. So submit as a PDF. I think 1 or 2 people already submitted and it wasn't a PDF. That's fine. Just go ahead and resubmit. You can do that. It'll just show me that you've done more than 1 submission, which is perfectly fine. Thank you for that reminder, Jackie. What was I doing? My math lab. I get distracted easily sometimes. Okay, cool. So I said you need an email. It doesn't have to be your CU Denver email. In fact, if you use Gmail and you check that a lot more than your UC Denver account, then use that. Because if I have to contact you for some reason through my math lab, it's going to go to that email. You need the course ID, which I mentioned is on the syllabus right here. I'll probably even copy and paste it. And you need some method to pay for my math lab. And that's not entirely true. So let's say that today you want to register for my math lab just to kind of follow along. And well, you don't have your credit card on you, you don't have a way to pay for it. There is kind of a message towards the very bottom when you get to the registration screen that says, okay, I want a 2-week free trial. So if you want to use that, that's great. Just be aware that at the end of those 2 weeks, you will have to pay. Otherwise, you're going to lose all of your progress. Okay, so we register now. And I think the first thing they ask you for is the course ID. Continue. And once you get there, if you have some sort of Pearson account, maybe for, I don't know, Spanish or something, and you want to keep using that, you can sign in. Otherwise, I imagine, 1 second. I imagine a lot of you guys are going to have to create an account. So you're going to create an account. I'm going to ask you for your email, your username. I won't really know any of this information. The only thing I care about is your first name and your last name. So even if you go by something else, match your first name and last name in Canvas, because that makes it very easy for me to enter your grades into Canvas. So you can use any username, don't care. You can use any email, won't even see it. This is the only thing I care about, you being consistent. And same thing with security question, security answer. I'm not going to see that. Certainly click this because then you'll avoid spam emails. Click, and then it's going to create an account. And so the next page it takes you to, I'm not going to show you because I don't want to create a billion usernames every semester. But yeah, thanks, James. What was I saying? Oh yeah, I don't want to create a new one every semester, but the next page tells you, okay, now you have to pay for it. Or like I said, at the very bottom, it'll say, I want to use my 2-week free trial because I don't want to sign up immediately. And then you'll be all set up. Any questions about the setup? Cool. And so let's go back to the home page. And then you go back to your home page. It might automatically sign you in. I don't really know. Then you use your username, which is just going to be your email, the password which you set up. You sign in. It should have our course. It should be the only course you have. I guess maybe if you're taking other courses, you could have other courses. Click through, and then again, same thing with Canvas. There's a lot of stuff here. You don't really need a whole lot of it. I'll tell you what's important. So what's important is your course home / assignments. Honestly, 95% of the time, you'll just click assignments. And if you click assignments, it's going to have all of your assignments, and it's also going to have all of the due dates. So I think someone said, do we have an assignment this week? Yes, technically we do, but it's not due until the 1st. So you have plenty of time to complete that. And that's generally how the flow works is once we get through 1.5, we'll have about 2 weeks to finish it. Once we get through 2.4, we'll have about 2 weeks to finish it. But definitely be checking that. I'll try and be on top of reminding people in the actual lecture. But all of the due dates are there. All of the assignments are there. Yes, all of them are unlocked right now. No, I wouldn't recommend doing anything beyond what we've already covered in class. But if you're feeling super motivated or you're getting ahead of the game and you want to keep going, that's fine. That is an option. And then, as I mentioned, you can get late credit. I think you lose 20% of your score. That just gives you an additional week. So if this assignment's due the 8th and you just don't complete it in time, well, then you have until the 15th to get late credit. What else? E-text, that is your book. So these are all of the chapters that we'll go through. Helpful reference, and that is just part of the kind of package that you get. I wouldn't really do study plan. I wouldn't do a whole lot of the other things. A student grade book is helpful, but it's the grade book for my math lab. It's not the grade book for the course. So let's say you have a 95%, oh, right here. I have a 94% in the class. Well, that's not really true. I have a 94% on the first assignment. So this is a good way to check to make sure I am updating your grades correctly. The grade book is, but it doesn't tell you your overall score. Your overall score is always going to be based on Canvas. So let's open an actual homework assignment just to see what it looks like. I think I looked and I liked the second question. Yeah, and so the first assignment is actually stuff that you quote unquote should know. And this is a perfect example that if you don't know how to do these questions, show up to my office hours, show up to Rachel's office hours, email me, stuff like that, because we're not going to cover a lot of this content. We start with that 1.3 section. But this is what each question looks like. Make it bigger. Cool. And kind of to navigate, one of the things that will help you is surprise, surprise question help. So let's say that we see this question. If you know how to answer it, great, answer it, move on. But if you get stuck, you have some options. You can click textbook, which is pretty cool. That will take you to the exact section that this question would be involved with. So if you're like, okay, I don't remember what we were doing or what section this question's from, click it, it'll take you to the section. You can ask me, so that would send me an email. That's perfectly fine. You can print out the problem for your own reference. Most people use view an example because it's super nice. Like, let's look. My question has x plus 5y. This question has x plus 4y. Well, I can click through and it's going to tell me, okay, this is how we do it in words. And then I click continue, and now it's going to actually go through this example. Okay, I plug in -5 for x, 6 for y. Continue. It's going to go all the way through and give you the correct answer for that example. So obviously, this is not the same question as the one I have. As I mentioned, this is 5y, this is 4y, but it's pretty darn close. And so you can kind of reverse engineer and say, oh, I see the example now. Now I know how to do my problem. The other, oof. Talking for lengthy periods is hard. Okay. The other option is help me solve this. Now, unlike view an example, this one actually goes through your exact same problem, x plus 5y, x plus 5y. And it's going to kind of ask you questions along the way, blah, blah, blah. And even if you get it wrong, it's going to give you the right answer eventually. But notice what happens here, that I'll go through this process, and if I close, it's going to change my question. So if you're on try 1, try 2, and you really want to get the question right that you see, do view an example. You can do that over and over and over. It doesn't really care. It's not going to affect your final answer. If you do help me solve this, it's going to A, give you a new question, and then B, lie to you and say you missed the question, which obviously is not true. I didn't even do the question. And so each question, you get 3 shots at it. So here, I don't know, I'm going to just type in something that is hopefully incorrect. 300. I'll say check answer. It's going to be like, oh, maybe that's not how you want to do it. Here's a little hint. I say, okay, you're right. That's silly of me to think it's 300, it's got to be 200. Check your answer, same thing. You're making an error. This is how you would resolve it. And notice on my third try, this changes to a spooky final check. So maybe it's 500. I click final check. It's going to say you missed it. It's going to say that what the correct answer should have been. And then you have two options. You can say, I'm done with this question. I'm over it. I want to move on. Or you can click a similar question. So here it says I've missed the question. Seems bad, but now I have my new question. And so if I attempt this, -2 plus 15 is 13. And I check my answer. Oh, I got it correct. It's going to say words of encouragement. And now notice how it's updated and it doesn't say I missed anything. So that is a cool thing about MyMathLab is if you really want to do well on a homework assignment, well, your only limitation really is time. You can try every question 5 billion times if you need to. I don't even see how many times you attempted the question. All I see is at the end of the day, did you get it right or did you get it wrong / not attempt the question? And to kind of, I think Rachel mentioned that MyMathLab is a little bit finicky. To kind of counter the fact that MyMathLab is a little finicky, I throw away 2 questions every assignment. So this assignment has 34 questions. If you get 32 of them correct, that's 100%. So you don't have to do any full assignment. Sure, it's great to practice a full assignment. So you should definitely do that if you have the time. But if you're getting frustrated, you're on your millionth attempt, or MyMathLab's just being mean and not accepting your correct answer, don't worry about it. I'm not going to factor that question into your grade for the homework assignment. So that's kind of nice, a little point forgiveness. I think that's all I have to say about MyMathLab. Let me see if I need to say anything else. No, I think that's good. Stop share briefly, make sure, does anyone have any questions now? Great. Well, let's get into it then. Okay, so probably won't get through the section, but we'll get through, fortunately, kind of how the course flows. And so all of this information is in the video that I posted on Canvas in the modules. We're not going to get through the whole assignment, and these questions are slightly different to work through as an example. I hate talking for 45 minutes straight. Okay. So factoring or solving quadratic equations. So this question or this section is pretty bulky. We have factoring, we have factor by grouping, we have solving quadratic formula, we have completing the square. But we start with this idea of simple factoring. And at the end of the day, all of these methods are to solve for x. And they're to solve for x specifically in questions that have x squared in them. So for this first question, I want to factor it first. And then once I have it factored, I want to solve it. And so the question I ask myself anytime I use simple factoring is I want to find 2 things that multiply to get me this. We call it the constant. It's the thing that doesn't have an x in it. 2 things that multiply to get me that, and add to get me this, which is, we kind of use it as the b term. It's the thing that's next to the x, not next to the x squared. And something that is worth mentioning, simple factoring only works if there's nothing in front of this x squared. So we're good in that case. We can use simple factoring. So does anyone have an idea about 2 numbers that multiply to get me 6, add to get me 5?
2 and 3.
Perfect. And so once I find those 2 numbers, whatever, it doesn't have to be equation, I write 2 separate parentheses, x and then I'm going to have something and another parentheses and x, and well, I'm going to have something. What that something is exactly what I was just told. Sorry, I can't see your name because I'm trying to figure out Zoom still. It's 2 and 3. Specifically positive 2, positive 3. We can have negatives, that happens. Does anyone know what I do from here? The goal is to solve for x. What do I?
Don't you like switch the values? So for like from positive to negative?
That is a shortcut. Is there more kind of a couple of steps to actually get there? You're right. It is. The answer is -2 and 3. No, -3. So that's great. That's kind of, I don't know. That's a trick. Does anyone know? Go ahead.
Would you separate both factors and equal them to 0?
Exactly. X plus 2 is equal to 0, and x plus 3 is equal to 0. And one of the reasons I'm not crazy about that shortcut is, yes, it works in this case, but if I have a 2 in front of here, or I have, let's say, a 6 here, I can't just kind of flip the sides. I have to break it down into 2 separate things. And by the way, this is called, the reason we're able to do this is called the zero product property. No, I don't make you memorize properties in this course. It's just something that's worth referencing. And specifically it says, oh, if I have something like this, well, either this guy's got to be 0 or this guy's got to be 0. So might as well set them both equal to 0 and solve. So how do I solve the left equation?
You would subtract 2 from both sides.
Perfect. And the other one?
Same thing, you subtract 3 from both sides.
And that's why whoever said it, -2 and -3 was absolutely correct. It's kind of good to go through that process. Cool. Any questions about that first example? Great. Let's move on to example B. Okay, so this one looks pretty different from this one, right? Like, what's the difference between this first equation and the second equation?
There's a factor on both sides. There's an x on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, there's x's on both sides. There's numbers on both sides. That's really great. And so I can't use this simple factoring method. Yeah, unless I have 0 on one side of my equation, which I don't. So how might I resolve that? How would I make it so I have 0 on one side of my equation?
Minus x squared.
That is one way to do it, but if we do that, I don't know, it seems kind of silly to say it this way, but now I have a bunch of spooky negatives flying around on the left side.
It'd be easier to add 5x to both sides.
Yes. And just to circle back, so that's technically not wrong. And yes, Jackie also brings up a very valid point. I could have divided both sides by -1. Let's just add 5x and add 6 to both sides. So that will leave us with 0 on this side, positive 5x, and positive 6. But yeah, all of those methods work. Technically, if you're really good at factoring, you could leave it negative on the left side, and dividing by -1 is a great solution to turn all of those negatives to positive. But let's just go ahead and add things to the right side. And now notice I kind of designed this question last night in a tricky way. This is actually the same thing as this question. So I'm not really going to go about solving it again. Really, the whole purpose of part B is to say, we need to have it in this form. We need to have x squared plus, I don't know, something x, 20x, doesn't really matter, plus something is equal to 0. Otherwise, we can't use this strategy of simple factoring. Any questions about this first thing? Cool. Now let's move on to factor by grouping. So this is the last thing I'm going to cover before I put you in your breakout rooms and you can work a little bit on your assignment. We're not going to have a lot of time, but that's perfectly fine. Okay, so again, let's maybe just copy this question over. So on the previous slide, we had 2 equations that looked essentially like this both times. Now, what's different between this equation and this equation now?
2x squared, x squared.
Yeah, I have something in front of my x squared. And so anytime you see that, your brain should be thinking, oh, I can't use that simple factoring thing. I can't just look at two numbers that multiply to be something and add to be the middle thing. So instead, I have to use something called factor by grouping. Now, this is one of those things in mathematics that there's probably 50 different ways to do it. If you learned a different way in high school or you find a different way online and you're consistently getting right answers, you don't have to do my method. That being said, the method that I'm about to show you is kind of the one that I've had the most success with. And so my first step with factor by grouping is I take my first number. Let's see if I can make that a little bit bigger. Cool. Perfect. I take my first number, the number in front of my x squared, so I guess not necessarily my first number if it's written in a weird order. I multiply it by my last number. And this method kind of, I don't know, it's sometimes referred to as the X method because here what I do is I make, well, a giant X. And this is certainly not very mathematical because I'm kind of just drawing a weird picture with lines. But this is used to kind of organize my information. So the first thing is I multiplied my first term by my last term. Let's put this in red. So what's 2 times 3?
6.
6. Put them up top. And then what I put on the bottom is this term that's next to my x. So let's put them in bold. I put a 5 down here. Let's make it red. Great. Any questions so far? Oops. Great. Now I play the same game I played on this previous slide. I want to find two things that multiply to get me 6, add to get me 5. What are those two numbers?
2 and 3.
So let's make this, I don't know, purple. So 2 and 3. Don't hesitate to stop me along the way. This is a very involved process. And so if you don't get step 2, well, you're not going to get step 5. So everyone good up to this point? Cool. Next step. What I do is I put parentheses. No, I don't put parentheses. What I do is I take that 2 and that 3 and I break up my 5x. So my 5x is now becoming 2x plus 3x. So notice how my first thing doesn't change at all. It's still 2. And my last thing doesn't change at all. It's still 3. But my x gets broken up. And so this one, so we have the same color, purple and purple. This 2 and 3 is taken directly from here. Oop, there's my 2. Oop, there's my 3. And now, well, this is the term why we call it factor by grouping is, well, we group things. Which, I mean, all I'm going to do is put a parentheses around my first 2 terms, put a parentheses around my second 2 terms. I'm actually going to do this just as a reference in case there's negatives. Okay. Now I ask myself, what fits into these first 2 terms? What fits into these last 2 terms? So for starters, what fits into these first 2 terms?
2x.
2x. And we want to find the biggest thing that fits into them. So you could say 2, which would be correct, but we want the largest variable and the largest number. And as correctly stated, that is 2x. And then I divide both terms. 2x divided, or 2x squared divided by 2x becomes what?
X.
Yep. And 2x, oh, why is this staying this? And 2x divided by 2x is
1.
1. Make sure that you're not just canceling this. Like the 2x doesn't go away, it just becomes 1. Cool. What fits into these last two terms?
3.
3. And so that'll leave behind 3x divided by 3 is,
X.
and 3 divided by 3 is.
1.
Any questions about that step? Great. Almost on the home stretch. So now what I use this information is I take this 2x and this 3, I group them together. So I say 0 is equal to 2x plus 3. And then my second factor that I write, it seems silly that I'm deleting that, but the second factor that I write is the thing that is doubled. So I had 2x plus 3 in front. What do I have matching? X plus 1 and x plus 1. So that is my second factor. By the way, this step is kind of cool in the process, the one right before. Let's make that up. Black. Oh. This step is pretty cool because if you do your process correct, these need to match. So if it's not matching on this step, that's a really nice check. And you say, oh, I must have done something wrong. Did I mess up this X? Or maybe I didn't pull out the biggest, we call it the greatest common factor, or the GCF. Maybe I didn't divide by the correct number. And so this was where my error is. Now what do I do?
You'd set both of those equal to 0, like
Yep.
before.
Exactly what we did on the previous slide. Running out of space, so maybe I'll move this up here. I set each factor equal to 0. And what's the property that allows me to do that again? Mention it briefly on the last slide.
The 0 product property?
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, it's a 0 product property. No, I'm never going to quiz you on that. Yes, I'm pretty nerdy, so I think that's a cool thing to know. Okay. So left one's pretty, or the right one's pretty easy. So I'm going to solve that for you guys. I subtract 1 from both sides. How do I solve this guy?
You isolate x, so you gotta like subtract 3 first.
Hmm. Then
Then divided by 2.
As a side question, how might I check these answers?
You can plug them back into the equation to see if it's true.
Which equation? There's a lot of equations on this slide.
It would be the original equation. No?
Yeah. Always when you're checking your answer, go back to the very original. Because if you make an error even on your first step, well, your answer might work for that, but you made your error there. So it makes sense that it's working there. So yeah, always when you're checking your answer, go back to the very first equation, which is a bit of a headache to check, especially with the fraction. But if you have time, it's not a bad idea to do. Great. Any questions on this? What's up?
I have a quick question. So that method that you used for the first step, what would that method be called?
So I've heard it called the X box method, but I don't use a box. So I would do factor by grouping X method.
Okay. And on tests or quizzes or anything like that, will you ever say like use this method specifically to solve this problem?
Not when I'm talking about like a process of factor by grouping. Like we're going to cover completing the square, and there will be questions where I say use complete the square. But here, like I learned how to do this a completely different way. I hated that way. It was much harder, but it technically is correct. So if you use a different process, yes, you would get full points.
Okay.
Does that make
Just
sense?
wanna make- Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Great. So as I mentioned, week 1, assignment 1 is that what's your name and what is your favorite movie? Week 1, assignment 2 is this. And like you have 10 minutes, so we're probably not going to get a whole lot done, but I just want to see some sort of submission. And so that's going to be part 1. Something that I want to mention is that my numbers might be off. Like 1108 is actually stretch college algebra as opposed to college algebra. Don't really worry about that. And if in the videos I'm like, oh, we have a test tomorrow and we don't, also ignore that. I kind of borrow and shift things around for my other courses. But anywho, so this is what the first assignment looks like. Should be able to, let's say, do the first 3, or maybe try and do one. Let's do this. Try and do 1, 4, and 6. And so if you finish those before the 10 minutes, great, submit that. If you only finish 1 of them, if you only finish 2 of them, that's fine. Just submit it into that assignments tab. Do we have to do the problems on paper and then take a picture, or can you write your answers in a document? You can write your answers in this document. Just make sure you submit it as a PDF. So like if you write your answers here, try and show your work as much as possible, but just print out a PDF and then submit it. Don't submit it as a docx. I recommend writing it and don't have to submit part 2. I'm not sure what that means, Jackie. Part 2. Oh, part 2 of 1.3. No. In fact, we're probably going to go back and do some more of 1.3 part 1 next class period.
Can we write it down on a piece of paper and then scan it and send it in?
I recommend doing that. That is how I would do it.
Okay.
And so I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms. Definitely kind of, I mean, ideally turn on your camera, but make sure that you are kind of keeping track of the people that you work with and say, I'm really jiving with this person. I want to be in their group regularly, or I don't like this person. Please don't put them in the same group. Because in about 2 weeks,